Welcome to Book Rising, a podcast by the Radical Books Collective. Hello and welcome to an episode of Book Rising, our podcast. I'm excited to step in for an episode of our Radical Publishing Future series, which is usually hosted by our managing director, Meg Arenberg. And that's because I have Dzekashu MacViban here with me today, joining from Berlin. I first met Dzekashu in Hargeisa at a wonderful book festival, and I came to know all about the exciting work that he does. He is the founder and editor of Bakwa Magazine, which started at the end of 2011, which is a truly innovative and dynamic magazine of literature and culture. And it rose out of a need to fill the gap created by the absence of literary and cultural magazines in Cameroon at the time. And it aims to empower Cameroonian storytellers and highlight a vibrant African cultural life. Dzekashu himself is a writer and editor with a degree in bilingual letters from university in Cameroon. His first book is a collection of poetry titled Scions of the Malcontent. I hope I'm saying that right. And it was published, and it was published in 2011. His fiction has appeared in Wasafiri, Kwani, and Jungle Gym, and he's also won quite a few prizes and residencies himself. And he is also someone who actually gives out prizes through Bakwa Magazine. So we'll talk about the many different roles you play, and hopefully we will learn a lot about what we think Bakwa is doing, which we think is a type of radical publishing, actually. So welcome, Dzekashu.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor. I've been following the work that you've been doing for quite a while now. So it's really an honor to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. So let's start with something very simple. Will you tell us all a little bit about Bakwa Magazine? What does the word mean, the title? And what is it that you do exactly? What is unique about your approach?
Okay. That sounds like starting with the most difficult question.
Is it? Oh gosh.
I'm just kidding. Yeah. So I mean, like, so Bakwa is a diminutive of Abakwa, which is a nickname of a town in Cameroon called Bamenda. So like, for example, if you're going to Bamenda, you'd say, I'm going to Abakwa. So like Bakwa is kind of like a diminutive form of Abakwa. And being obviously, or at the time, being primarily an English-speaking magazine when it was conceived, Abakwa sounded like kind of the most logical name to give Bakwa Magazine. And definitely a lot has changed about what we do and how we approach. Maybe I should start with So like very much in the very, very beginning, Bakwa was conceived as this literary magazine because there really weren't magazines that had the vision or boldness that I was looking for, especially in Cameroon and particularly English-speaking magazines. And so very impulsively, I decided to start it because I was like, well, why not? There are all these really cool magazines everywhere from Saraba to Kwani to Chimurenga. And it's like, why don't we have something in Cameroon? So that's pretty much how Bakwa came about. And
it was the heyday of the African
cultural
magazines at the time.
It was really. Those were glorious days. And I was like, why are we not part of this cool club? And so I spoke to a friend who was the editor of Pala Pala magazine, which was kind of the foremost Cameroonian digital magazine at the time, and it had just closed. And I spoke to him. We had a lot of conversations, and I had a lot of questions because I was just jumping into this, having no idea what I was doing. And given that he was editor of Pala Pala and is a journalist, he was really able to tell me about a lot of things, put me in touch with a lot of people. And based on that, I was just like, whatever, let's go start it. And that's pretty much how it started. And then I would send out in addition to the call for submissions, I would send out emails to people whose work I read, and like, hey, I read your work here and here. I just started so and so, and like, are you interested in sending something our way? And like, yeah, that's what it looked like in the beginning around 2011, 2012, and then gradually. I started trying different things and also having different editors on board at different stages. And one of our first major experiments was in translation, actually, and it was a partnership with the OFI Press in Mexico, where
Wow.
so it was like this Bakwa Magazine OFI Press partnership where the OFI Press published West African writers in Spanish, and Bakwa published Mexican writers in English translation as well. That was like 2012. That was like maybe Bakwa O2, something like that, I think. Yeah, so that was like kind of like 2012. So that was like our first main experiment, and that it was quite well received in terms of like just introducing writers across geographies and across languages. And the feedback kind of like went around for years. Like I would still hear people talk about it years later. And that was quite interesting. And it got me thinking. So in addition to like just doing the normal publications that we're doing, I was always thinking of what can we do next? How can we grow? How can we go in different directions? How can we solve so and so problem? Because it's always an attempt to solve a problem that pushes us to kind of like a different level or a different kind of philosophy. And I think the next big shift started coming around 2016, where we discovered that it was not enough to just be that place where you can publish writers and make sure that they're read by a larger audience. It's definitely necessary, but it's not enough. Like not even close. There's like so much more that needs to be done. So it's at that point that we started thinking of more partnerships, and then we also started doing kind of like about 2 to 3 workshops every year. So simultaneously, we're doing workshops that come with mentoring programs. Then we also did the Bakwa Magazine short story competition, which we later on renamed the Bakwa short story competition. And so like 2016-ish was very important for us because we kind of like went beyond just being a digital publisher, but we became very active on the ground. We became very involved in really building infrastructures for the future, because there were so many writers that needed the skills. There were writers that needed networking. There were writers that needed mentoring. There were writers that needed recognition. And so it's like just so much more that needed to be done beyond online publishing. And so that's how we kept pushing these boundaries more and more. And then came the Limbe to Lagos project. Then lots of other projects.
Yeah, of course. I love that you say that a lot of the shifts that you made and the growth that you had came as kind of ways to problem solve certain things that you were seeing in the cultural space. Just very quickly, I think of course, you did a lot of innovative, exciting things, and you continue to do that to really create a whole new kind of platform and space for Cameroonian writers, poets, and so on. But in what way, how do you think about sort of Cameroonians, what I see as a pretty glorious literary past, right? I think there's been historically exciting Francophone literary production from Cameroon. I'm thinking about writers like Mongo Betty, I guess. How do you navigate the old and the new? Like, what's the difference,
That's an interesting question. What's the difference between the old and the new? I think like writing always reflects the period, and it reflects the concerns, like some of the most pressing concerns of each period. So I guess different periods of Cameroonian writing have really different concerns, different stylistic approaches, and overall, it's also very much tied to individual writers' idiosyncrasies and personal styles. But interestingly, we're very much we also like to look at ourselves as bridging different kind of gaps.
Right.
And it doesn't just happen with the work that we do with Cameroonian literature, because we actually don't define ourselves as a Cameroonian magazine or Cameroonian publisher. It's more like Cameroon based, but the focus is African literary production, either at home or the diaspora.
Right.
And to come back to your question, so like we very much like to define ourselves as bridge builders, because like we are very much at the intersection between a lot of things, and we kind of bring so many different people or so many different things together. For example, we are kind of like a midway between the younger generation and the older generation. For example, we have projects where you would have older writers mentoring younger writers. You would have projects where you have younger translators translating older writers. You have projects where you have English-speaking writers in workshops with French-speaking writers, and then there's translations and all of that. And so like we tend to build these bridges across language, across age, across gender, across geographies. And I think it's very crucial to the work that we do, because it's kind of like we are we're kind of like in the middle of so many different things. That's why I like to keep coming back to the image of the bridge.
Sure. That's a great image.
And
I guess also, yeah. No,
yeah,
I guess I go ahead.
and just to come back to like what you mentioned about Cameroonian literature's glorious past, definitely we've had a glorious past. We also had kind of like slow years, but I think we have kind of like come back to a glorious period. Like if you look at Imbolombwe, if you look at and it's there's so many different ways to look at it, between writers getting $1 million book contracts and Howard Maximus, who's kind of like, I can say a product of Bakwa, because like literally the first time he started writing was at a Bakwa workshop, and now he's won like the Malcontent Fellowship, and he's doing his MFA, and even beyond that, there's like so many exciting writers who have agents and who have book deals in the pipeline, which I cannot talk about right now. But still, I definitely think that we are back to the glorious age, both for French-speaking writing and for English-speaking writing.
I think I've misphrased my question maybe slightly. I think I was thinking also about, I think the gap you're filling is a gap of infrastructure. Like, I think, yes, Cameroon has had glorious writers in the past, but there's always been some sort of an issue around access, or actually understanding like the public kind of culture within Cameroonian space, because of political, stuff going on and things like that, as opposed to, say, South Africa or Nigeria, where we've had a continuous flow that enters different parts of the world. So it felt like Cameroon goes through phases of being locked out and then back in. So I think Bakwa has consistently, now it's been over a decade, has been, being out in the world, and has created an intense and amazing infrastructure, I think, through all your productive collaborations and so on. So I think that's partially kind of what I was getting at, but I wasn't articulating it quite.
Definitely.
Yeah. So maybe very, not in a confrontational way, but why do you publish in English, right? I ask, of course, in the light of, in the world, we are all like, stop publishing in English, go back, decolonize languages, go to this, do more translation, which of course you do. But of course, it's totally different for Cameroon because of what has been called the Anglophone crisis. And in light of the political complexities that arise out of that, I know you're bilingual, French and English. So just tell us a little bit what this Anglophone crisis is, and where is Bakwa in terms of English language publishing within that? Are they related?
Before I come to the question itself, I would like to kind of like also point out how we navigate languages in general. Like definitely we are an English language magazine, but Only to some extent, because like if you look at our content, we have I would say we are maybe 80% of our content is in English and 15% is in French, and the other 5% is in other languages. So like, for example, we definitely have content in English a lot. Then we have content in French. Then we have content in Pidgin English. Then we have forthcoming content in Camfranglais, and then we've had content in German in the past, and then we've had content in Spanish. So it's not exactly very accurate to define us as an English speaking magazine, which we still are. Yeah, and cue in an anecdote about how a lot of people don't know how to process an issue of Bakwa Magazine. For example, an English-speaking reader in Germany would read it and would be would feel a bit unhappy because they're like, okay, they've read it. It is like 7 stories in English and 4 stories in French, and they don't read French, and they're like, they don't know what to make of it. And then on the other hand, you would have somebody in Paris who speaks both English and French who would read it and praise us that this is what they've been looking for their whole lives. So it's always quite interesting to see how these different reactions, how different people react to it. And to come to Cameroon and how we situate ourselves, that's a really complex question, because it's kind of like also situating us within a much more complex issue. I think the best way to answer it is that overall, our audience is a very international English-speaking audience in a much more broader sense. But otherwise, so far as Cameroon is concerned, so far as the Anglophone problem is concerned, we do our best to raise awareness, to publish stories about the Anglophone problem, to translate work across, right, and so across English and French, such that there is much more access to Cameroonian stories, no matter where you're from, because like we believe this access is also very important, and it kind of like brings me to this project that we did with the University of Bristol, which ended with the publication of the bilingual anthology, Your Feet Would Lead You Where Your Heart Is, Le Crépuscule des âmes sœurs. This was a very important project for us because its aim was kind of like to create empathy among writers and by default a much more larger audience by actually telling stories, by telling the stories of everyday Cameroonians, irrespective of where they come from, irrespective of what language they speak, and above all, making sure that these stories were translated and available in English and French.
Wow. Yeah, I understand. And you mentioned a bit your readers. How do you characterize your readership? Do you have a readership in Cameroon itself? I know you do a lot of events, for example, in Yaoundé. I think I've seen, flyers and stuff for that.
Yeah.
Where do you find your readers primarily? Where do you actively seek? Where do you actively seek readership? Who do you want to be reading them, and who is reading them?
Yeah. Who do we want to be reading them, and who's reading them? I mean, I guess we want everybody to be reading.
Of course.
And also, I also think across the different projects that we have, because it's also very important to point out that Bakwa is not just Bakwa Magazine. So there's Bakwa Books, which is more like the full-fledged publishing, and there's Bakwa Cast, which is the podcast. And kind of the audiences are almost very different for all of these. For example, and especially with the podcast, we have a much more different audience, which is not necessarily a literary audience. And this is because the kind of like guests that we had on the podcast were not just literary, like we had conversations with bloggers, with techies, with art historians, with poets, and so it's much more different. But when you come to Bakwa Magazine, it's a very it's very so it's an intersection of so many different audiences. So you have obviously Cameroonians on the ground. You have a lot of people who are looking for African rights, and be it lovers of literature, be it academics, be it curious people. It's really an overlap of so many different kinds of audiences, and it differs when it goes to Bakwa Books, again depending on the kind of book that we publish. But say, for example, we have a very young audience. Like our audience is very, very young, and And again, it's so like the question of audience depends on so many different metrics. For example, those who read our print publications are not necessarily those who access our online publications. So those are very different kinds of metrics. But overall, I would say the countries where we have the highest audiences are obviously Cameroon, the US, the UK, France, and Germany,
Mhm.
and Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa.
Nice. Yeah, that's the big English speaking places.
Yeah, yeah.
That's excellent. So, I wanted to ask a little bit about your selection criteria. I know there are a lot of projects. I know there's proper books. I know there's magazine. know there's an online presence. I know there's a prize. But to get to the very basic thing, how do you choose what and whom to publish? What's your criteria? What do you look for?
Okay. In the case of Bakwa Magazine, for example, we have a call at least once every year, usually around January, February. And what we're looking for really is exceptional writing. So like, right, I know that this is thrown around a lot, but we're really, really looking for writing that is honest, writing that is experimental, writing that has personality attached to it, not like writing that is formulaic. Like that's like the worst kind of writing that we like. We don't like formulaic writing, but really we're looking for writing that is experimental, writing that has personality attached to them, writing that is really just willing to take the risk and try to do new things, even if they're not succeeding at it, but like just the fact that they're trying. And yeah, that's those are things that we look for. And usually about 60% of what we publish in Bakwa Magazine comes from the open calls, and then about 40% comes from commissioned pieces. And yeah, each issue has a really different thing that we want to do with it, or thing that we want to achieve with it. For example, with taxi drivers, we were really curious about trying to document or access or just share the stories about what it means to travel as a Black person, as an African person. And the stories were really, really interesting. They were heartbreaking. They were political. They went in really all sorts of directions, from personal essays to historical pieces. And it was really a very interesting issue to bring together. And also, it was our first print issue of Bakwa Magazine. And it was also very, very different from Bakwa 10, Family Politics, which was a much more darker issue. I mean, like, I never knew that family issues were this dark until we put out Bakwa 10, Family Politics. That's like the most traumatizing issue
Wow.
we've had to work with or conceptualize or like publish. It was really, really very traumatizing, but still we feel that these are important stories that had to be told. A lot of them are personal stories. Then there's also fiction, and there's also beautiful poetry. But overall, the writing is always consistent. It's always experimental. It's always beautiful.
And I love how you're surprised by the dark aspect of family. Meanwhile, when you look at your past issues, of course, those striking, beautiful covers that you'll design, there's Pain.
Yeah.
There's the one that says, Why Poets Die. I mean,
Yeah.
this is clearly like a
Yeah.
dark edge going on here. So I'm not surprised that's what you got.
Yeah.
But that's
Interesting.
wonderful. And that also
That,
leads, of course, to
that's a
formal
very
experiments.
interesting remark. I think I was speaking much more comparatively, like kind of like especially comparing Bakwa 10 to Bakwa 9, I guess. Like
Yeah.
Bakwa 9 was like much more about like infrastructural problems, political problems, like visa problems. And like Bakwa 10 is just like darkness in the family and like
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, of course. One of the exciting things about Bakwa is that you are the team is very committed to print. books as well as in the magazine. I know you have some online presence, but your commitment to me seems to be to print. How do you navigate the challenges of these massive places like Amazon? Like Amazon now does translation. Like, it's very hard to ignore. And in general, big publishing tends to swallow small publishing. So how do you navigate the challenge of that?
Like we've always thought about all these things, like how do we navigate all these different things, and I guess right now one of the ways in which we're able to navigate, say, maybe availability mostly, or maybe print availability in certain parts of the world, is because we're currently distributed by African Books Collective, and they're doing quite an interesting job in terms of like really distributing our work and making sure that we are accessible to a much more larger audience than we were in the past. And yeah, so like you mentioned big publishing. Yeah, definitely. I mean, like we could have a whole podcast just about
I know.
publishers swallowing other publishers. But I think there's like so many different facets to Amazon to look at. And if you're looking at Amazon publishing in particular, I think it's quite fascinating the number of translations that Amazon is publishing. The numbers are really, really high. And I think that's a very good thing, actually, when you think about it. Because like more, I mean, like I guess we're getting back into a glorious period of literary translations. But I definitely think Amazon Crossing, yeah, because like specifically, like I said, Amazon has like so many different facets, and here I'm talking about Amazon Crossing. So I think they're really doing some good work. But yeah, so like we try to always evolve depending on what exactly we're trying to do, and our print audiences are definitely different from our online audiences, and we actually look at them. We actually like have projects which approach these different audiences specifically. So for example, we have exclusively print projects which are targeted at these print, so exclusively print projects for people who like reading the book, because like the print book is an institution of its own. It's very different. It has its own aesthetics. It has its own history and everything. And yeah, we definitely tend to do a lot of project-based publications as well.
Yeah. No, one of the things, we came up with a manifesto for the Radical Books Collective. And one of the things we did realize that the print book has not gone anywhere. People are consuming print books. They love print. Yeah. They buy print, it's just like, we can't let just those like 10 global corporate publishers publish all the print books. I guess that remains the challenge. But of course, you have a loyal following, and and I think the African continent continues to show that they have discerning taste, and that there's still a lot of innovation to come out of there. What is your advice for future publishing platforms such as yours? Somebody starting out, what have you learned over the years?
Okay. I need to think about this one. So like in like I would so like two things. I would say if you want to start something, I would say you should definitely do your research before you start. And once you feel like you're ready, you should give it your all and like really, really never stop. It's a bit different the way we approached it, because like in 2011 it was very different. I did not, so like I just like jumped into it very without really thinking about it. And I think in that particular situation that was the best, because like if I had to overthink it, if I had to think like where we're gonna be in 10 years time, where we're gonna have money to print, where we like if I had to think about all these questions, I would never start backwards. So like I guess above all, what matters is just to go ahead and start after you've done your research and never give up. Because another interesting thing is that I think a lot of the projects that we've been able to do comes very much from the fact that we had the will and the determination and the passion to do these things. Because like if you take away these, we would have like just, I don't know, we would have found one excuse or the other. But the fact that that we are passionate about what we do and that we have the determination, it makes us to always look for ways to do what we want to do, be it partnerships, be it whatever. Yeah.
That's great. Really great. I'm going to ask you a final question, and don't be mad at me because I'm going to lock you into asking questions about Cameroon.
Yeah.
I know you're doing global work and continental work, but just sort of it's kind of interesting to see there's been a lot of big names, and I think Bakwa can take some credit for that. But internationally, there's been Imbolo Mbue, but also like Matlon's book just came out, and it's going to do really well. I mean, there's a lot of Cameroonian presence. Can you describe why, or can you tell me why, or like, where is Cameroonian literature headed? Why is there this sudden kind of surge interest?
So I think the writing has always been there, but what has been lacking has been infrastructures.
Yeah.
And I think that now that infrastructures are beginning to get more and more available, more and more democratized, more and more accessible, it's now making it possible for a higher number of writers to gain much more attention than they were able to gain before. Take Mutlon, for example. He is a fantastic writer. His last two books were really, really brilliant. Mm-hmm. And I'm really happy that he gets his English debut. It's like really, really such a big deal.
Yeah, yeah. Do you wanna leave us with one Bakwa project that you believe fits perfectly into the radical books category that we should immediately check out?
Yes, definitely. And it's a project that I mentioned earlier on. It's the bilingual anthology that we did with the University of Bristol. Your feet will lead you where your heart is. Le crépuscule des âmes sœurs. It's one of our most important projects, if I can put it that way. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it, it's maybe our most ambitious project in terms of the number of people who've been involved in it, in terms of the number of years we've taken to like conceptualize it and execute it, and in terms of how far the project is changing the conversation around writing, around translations, around audiences. I really think if there is a project that I want people to think about or to look up immediately after this conversation, it's definitely Your Feet Will Lead You Where Your Heart Is.
Okay.
This answer.
Yeah, and I will include it in a link when we publish the podcast. Your Feet Will Lead You Where Your Heart Is. 400 pages of radical punch, right?
Yeah.
Translation, short stories, lots of different editors and incredible new voices. Thank you so much, Dzekashu, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and it's always great to learn from you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Like I've always like just been reading everything that you're doing, the interviews that you do, the Zooms that you do, and it was like you're really doing such great work.
Thank you so much.